Good afternoon, everyone. We are the group 17, and we would like to discuss with you the topic 18, preterito, imperfect subjunctive in reading and conversation manner. To discuss with you what is the Spanish imperfect subjunctive, here is Mr. Alchan.
What is the Spanish imperfect subjunctive? The imperfect subjunctive tense is very often used in Spanish. This tense is also known as the Spanish past subjunctive, but its real name is the preterite imperfect tense of the subjunctive mood. The word preterite means past and the word subjunctive denotes mood. The subjunctive does not express time. It reveals the point of view of a speaker. That's why you'll notice that the Spanish imperfect subjunctive is often used to express a point of view in the past. The first to understand this past subjunctive tense is understanding the present subjunctive. This, this is because the imperfect subjunctive is basically used to express the same subjectivity as the present subjunctive, except in the past, since it is in the past. The main difference is the timing. So learning more the present subjunctive before you get into the nitty and gritty of how to use the imperfect subjunctive is something you might want to do. After you understand what the Spanish subjunctive mood is, and have a better idea of what it means and when it's used, you can start looking at how you can use the imperfect subjunctive. If you have no idea what the imperfect subjunctive will look like, we will start by showing you that first. Then we will explain the different scenarios where you can use the Spanish imperfect subjunctive along with examples of each case. There are some basic rules used to form the imperfect subjunctive. In an imperfect sentence, what will mainly change the verb? What will mainly change is the verb. Let's look at the sample. Let's look at an example. Quisiera dos libros por favor. This translates to I'd like two books, please. I'd like two books, please. In this sentence, the verb is querer. Conjugating querer into quisiera is what makes this sentence an imperfect subjunctive example. So, to use the imperfect subjunctive correctly, you need to know how to conjugate Spanish verbs with this tense.
How to conjugate a regular verb into imperfect subjunctive in Spanish. First, when you conjugate a regular verb into imperfect subjunctive in Spanish, you will have to use the third plural form of the preterite tense. Take the verb hablar and tomar as an example. The third person form of the preterite for these verbs would be as follows: hablar, to hablaron, tomar, to tomaron. When you conjugate hablar into the third person plural form, you think about what you would say after ellos or ellas. Echas toda la noche, echas una cerveza antes de bailar. Now try to conjugate the two verbs given below in the third person plural form of the preterite simple tense, tener and escuchar. Remember, if you can't figure out how to conjugate these, then put an echas or echas in front of the verb. Here's how you should have conjugated it. Tener to tavieron, escuchar to escucharon. Now let's proceed to second step. The next step after having found the third person plural form of the preterite tense would be able to take off the ron. Remember that in the first step, you identify the third plural form of the verb. And if you can remember, they are ron on the last part of the word. Now in the second part, you need to take off the ron. And after conjugated the verb into the third person plural of the preterite tense, you remove the ron at the end of the verb, and it will look like this: escucharon, escucharon, and remove the ron for the last part of the word, escucha. And for hablaron, hablaron, remove the ron part, it will be habla. Later on, we will be adding different letters to the ending of these verbs, but first we should be familiarized. Activity break. So I will give you two verbs and you will first conjugate them into the third person plural of the preterite tense and then remove the ron at the end. First is regresar, second is esperar. Again, try to look for the third plural form of the verb and then take off the ron part. Now here are the answers. Regresar, regresaron to regresa. Esperar, esperaron to espera. Here it is clear that the third plural form of regresar is regresaron and esperar is esperaron. And take off the ron part. This will give us the answer of regresa and espera. Third step. Now you will add the imperfect subjunctive endings to your verb. Now that you have your verb with an open ending, you need to use one of the two imperfect endings to conjugate the verb into the imperfect subjunctive. Again, the first step is to identify the third plural form of the verb, and after that, remove the ron on the end of the verb, and that will give you an open ending. And here in the third step, you will need to use one of the two imperfect endings to conjugate the verb into the imperfect subjunctive. Now I would like you to focus on the table. Here are the two imperfect endings to conjugate the verb into imperfect subjunctive. Yo, you can choose whether it is ra or se. Tu is ras or ses. In ella, ella, usted, ra or se. Nosotros or nosotras, ramos or semos. Vosotros, vosotras, raíz or seis. And ellos, ellas, ustedes, ran or sen. Now let me give you some examples so you can get a better visual. Comer. Let's identify the third plural form, comieron. Second step is to remove the ron, which will lead to comie. Now, for the third step, let's go back to this table. When we have an open ending, we can choose whether it is ra or se. So yo comiera or yo comiese. And for the second example, it is the same. Again, the verb is estar. Identify the third plural form, estuvieron. Remove the ron part, estuvie. Now it have an open ending. Now choose in the table whether it is ras or ses. And the sentence will be tú estuvieras or tú estuveses. Now, how to conjugate irregular verbs into the Spanish imperfect subjunctive. Like with the most rules in Spanish or any language, really, there are exceptions. Though the system I have taught you above is a general rule, there are some irregular verbs that stray from this rule. The best thing to do is to understand and get used to conjugating the verb into the imperfect subjunctive. And once you get hung of it, start memorizing the irregular verbs that do not follow the general guidelines. Now I will going to give you three of the most commonly used irregular verbs for the imperfect subjunctive and will show you how to conjugate them. For the irregular verb ir, yo fuera o fuesi, tú fueras o fuesis, ella usted fuera o fuese, nosotros nosotras fuéramos o fuésemos, vosotros vosotras fuerais o fuesis. For irregular verb ser, yo fuera o fuesi, tú fueras o fuesis, ella fuera o fuesi, nosotros nosotras fuéramos o fuésemos, vosotros vosotras fuerais o fuesis, ellos ellas fueran o fuesen. As you can see, it is identical to the irregular verb ir. Now for irregular verb ver. Yo viera o viesi, Tú vieras hubiesen, ella viera hubiese, nosotros nosotras viéramos hubiésemos, vosotros vosotras vierais hubieseis, ellos ellas vieran hubiesen. When to use the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish, and this part will be reported by Mr. Edison Suelos and Ms. Angelica Fajardo.
When to use the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish. Now that you have a good grasp of how to conjugate the Spanish verb in the imperfect subjunctive tense, you need to learn when the imperfect subjunctive structure is used in Spanish. We'll go over all of the different times the imperfect subjunctive is used, along with a specific example in each category. Number 1, past and present. The imperfect subjunctive is used when you are indicating an action in the past in the same situation where subjunctive will be required in the present. For example, look at this sentence in the present subjunctive. Es emocionante que María me lea el periódico. This translates to, it is exciting when Maria reads the newspaper to me. This is when you can use what you have learned to good use. If you want to say the same thing, but in the past you use the imperfect subjunctive to change something that is in the present to the imperfect subjunctive, you change the verbs. So you change es and lea, es to era, lea, leera. The sentence will now look like this. Era emocionante que María me leyera el periódico. This now translates to, it was exciting that Maria would read the news to me. Number 2, expression of desire or wishes or doubt. That imperfect subjunctive is commonly when you are trying to express a desire of something you wish to happen, or when you are expressing doubt for something you are unsure of. A wishes in situation where you are hoping for something to happen. In Spanish, the phrase ojalá que is used often. Ojalá que basically means hopefully or I wish. So let's say you want to say, I hope it will rain on Wednesday. Then you will take the present sentence in Spanish. Ojalá que llueva el miércoles, which means I hope it rain on Wednesday. Other expressions that usually indicate your desire or wish for something include sentence that start with the following phrases. Espero que, deseo que, quiero que, exigo que, prefiero que, pido que. Number 3, see if events. The imperfect subjunctive is also used when you use an if clause when trying to explain something that contrary to fact or unlikely to happen. So for example, when you say, if I work harder, I will get promoted. This will translate to, si trabajara más, duro me proveerán. This sentence is using the if clause to explain why the person cannot do something. So, contrary to the fact that the person did their job, they were not promoted because they did not work hard enough, but using the if clause simplifies this sentence. You can see that the two verbs in the Spanish sentence were conjugate according to the trick that I showed you above. trabajar, enyo trabajara, promover and ellos prov, prov, promovieran. Spanish speaker use the Spanish imperfect subjunctive in the if clause of this conditional sentence, the English equivalent of this unreal sentence in the second conditional.
For que or that, when you hear people speak in Spanish, you might hear the word que a lot. The que might actually mean different things depending on where it is placed in a sentence and where the accent mark falls. For the imperfect subjunctive example, the closest translation you can get to expressing que is the word that. For instance, if you wanted to say something like I study so that I can speak better Spanish, the that would be a replacement of the word que when using the imperfect subjunctive. The imperfect subjunctive is used in the dependent clause after you use the word que, but only when the independent clause is in the past tense. Now let me give you an example of this. Yo quiera que él tomara un tequila conmigo, which is I wanted him to drink a tequila with me. Last is being polite. The imperfect subjunctive is also used in some polite expressions that contain Spanish and modal verbs. For example, I would like to attend the party, would translate to quisiera asistir a la fiesta. Now, activity break. How would you say, should I go with you? Now, let's see if you get a correct answer. The word should is the same as the verb deber. So, how would you translate this sentence? Keep in mind that you need to use the imperfect subjunctive. The answer is debería ir con ustedes. Now let's wrap up. Mastering the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish. The key to mastering the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish, like any other grammatical topic, is lots of practice. We hope that you now have a better understanding of what the imperfect subjunctive is and how to use it, and most importantly, when to use it. Make sure you keep practicing the perfect subjunctive so that you can get better at using this tense when it is necessary. So that will be all for the last topic for this semester. Again, topic 18, Preterito Imperfect, Imperfect Subjunctive in Reading and Conversation Manner. Thank you.